Let's see, what can we do today? The Matthews hat. Cover up all my gray hair.
Yeah.
You do video, audio, or what?
Yeah, I do video too.
Okay.
Most of the time when it works.
Shirt my wife gonna swear she's gonna throw away, but it's so comfortable.
Yeah, looks good. Well, that's good. We got it all figured out. So
All right,
appreciate your time.
sure.
So man, big win on the weekend there last weekend. That was good. It was fun to watch. Fun to watch everybody. We were cheering on
Yeah.
for obviously Chris Perkins, but yeah, he came close, but a little short.
You guys up in Canada?
Yeah, BC.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
one
ever been up this way?
Isaac travels with Isaac. I can't remember his last. Put me
Bedford?
on this. Bedford. Yeah, he shot real well there too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, he lives just a hour and a half south of me. So, yeah, yeah, he's good shit. But yeah,
Yeah,
that was good. It was fun to watch. It's quite the event. I haven't
yeah, they had
watched.
over 3,000 shooters.
Wow. Wow, was that the biggest one they've had?
Biggest one. Yeah, it's starting to rival Vegas.
Really? Wow.
Way better format, in my opinion. That whole
Better
risk
than
and reward makes the game.
Oh yeah.
I actually hit Rob up that years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago. I pitched him an idea on using that dot, but I kind of wanted it more up in the nine ring, and as soon as we go head to head, put it in play. But I think it's a good. It's good the way it's kind of good the way it is. I think. I still like the idea of if you're going to want archery to go big, you got to make it televisable, right?
Yeah.
So you got to have a lot of B-roll, you got to have a lot of lead up to it, and in order to do that, you got to have stuff to film. And maybe they can film other classes and stuff, but I just thought if you had that head to head format, like it makes the game way more fun to do. It makes way more ways to fail. It makes ways where a nobody can beat a somebody, and
Yeah.
that's what gives games longevity.
Yeah.
I have a buddy that's into bench rest rifles and stuff, and he's like always complaining why nobody shows up. I said, well, simple. You can't put enough people in equal equipment so that it just becomes about the shooter. It's all an equipment game. And so you can't satisfy, you know, making enough people as accurate as the guy that's winning. So you're never going to be successful.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen a whole lot of them. But no, I thought it was really entertaining. We really liked I mean, Chris was throwing down a few 12s there. That gets entertaining when you call the 12 just to see if
Oh,
you're gonna
yeah.
go for it or not.
I mean, it's the only way I got myself dug out of the nine I shot. And
Right?
I kind of factored in. So I go out there and I actually had some arrow issues because I'd added some heavier points right before I left, and I didn't spend enough time tuning arrows in at my draw length. That's kind of vicious on stuff. And even as hunters, you want to. I really caution guys that putting too much point weight in arrows because it has a big despining effect, and it's not really a great positive. There's a balance in everything, and I ran into an issue where I couldn't. I thought I was having like issues with the bow or just not getting along with something, and then I realized that my number four arrow, because I always shoot the same arrow in the same spot, right? And
Oh yeah.
I noticed that my number four arrow was always center of the X. So then I started looking at, hey, maybe I didn't spend enough time tuning these arrows in, and that was really the game changer. It took me into the matches, and I missed one X in the matches. Shot a nine, which I can't seem to get out of. I mean, I've never won an indoor national tournament as a pro other than Lancaster, and I've won it 3 times and took third once.
Oh
And
yeah.
and I've shot nines every single time, which is crazy. Which you shoot a nine at Vegas, you shoot a nine
It's
at
over.
international, a four at internationals, or five, you're done.
Yeah.
And it's a miserable form of archery, frankly. There's nothing fun about it. It's purely stressful. It only fits type B personalities. And you'll notice a lot of those guys on the stage. Chris, you mentioned Chris Perkins. He's much more of a type A personality. So just my analysis, you take guys like him or Dave Cousins, they're the only type A guys up there. And every once in a while, you get a few of those guys in and they work off pure bravado. If
Yeah.
they're not shooting good, they'll crack.
Yeah.
They have to be like at the top of their game. But yet you watch some of these other guys and they don't have a nerve in their body. They don't feel nerves. They don't feel pressure near as much, and that's just innate to their personality. And it,
Yeah. I know. I like what Jimmy Lutz there. I mean, that guy's up there, throws a wrist strap on a week ago, and he's up there. He's dropping 11s like they're slots in
it,
a. So he didn't look like he had any pressure, but I like what he said there. He said he's seen you wearing the rocking the wrist strap, so he thought he got to
well,
look cool when
what's
he
funny
do
is I like to think that those guys listen to me. They don't really acknowledge me sometimes, but I like to think maybe they listen every once in a while because I go back and forth, and I've won a lot of tournaments with a handheld in my life. But I'll be straight up to you. There's nothing more accurate than a single jaw caliper release. Nothing. There's nothing more forgiving. Everything's in a linear line. I hook into my neck like this. So when I do that, it takes a lot of the pressure and tension out of my forearm. So my finger is just really relaxed. And I'm in the process of building my own release because
Oh
when
yeah.
you can't really teach people to hook into their neck
Yeah, behind your neck.
because
I noticed you, yeah, you put your thumb behind your neck, yeah.
yeah. And that helps me keep from collapsing under pressure and stuff. And it's just
Oh
what
yeah.
it does too is you talk a lot about rifle shooters where they lock in and they really lock their body and their cheek and everything tight in. Well, it's the same principle. If you're
Right.
sitting out here just floating around, you're not going to be as steady as if you've got all this locked together.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense, yeah, for
The
sure.
strap is in one linear line all the way through, and you're just breaking it with your finger.
Right.
And but you can't teach people to do that because 99% of the releases on the market, if you notice, mine's modified to bring the trigger further back. All the triggers are too far forward because
Yeah.
everybody's like trying to, I guess, sell people that they can build a longer draw length, if they shoot a shorter release, which is stupid. It's absolutely stupid. Your draw length is here, okay?
Hmm.
Just because you got a shorter release doesn't mean you should bring the string back here.
Yeah. Right. Makes sense.
This is draw length.
Yeah.
And I was actually standing next to Jimmy when he was practicing. I'm like, looks like you're pounding with that thing. That's the release I shoot too. And he said, yeah.
Right.
I said, more forgiving, isn't it? He said, yeah, I think so. He said, less of this crap. And that's what I notice under pressure. If I can't like crank around and hold that release super tight on a
Yeah.
handheld, I struggle with under pressure. And you can't do that because most of these releases, the jaw is moving the opposite direction.
Yes.
So you're pulling the loop out in the center of that jaw. And I think it's frankly a horrible way to design a release. And eventually I'll
Yeah.
get the chance to build my own and test it out on some top people. Now, if you're a really good shooter and you do everything exactly the same, you can, I mean, hell, they shoot fingers still really well. So I can't imagine all the little differences I see in releases shooting fingers, but there's a reason why they're not as accurate. Okay. It's just, there is. You just, when you start getting down to, the nuts and bolts of release shooting, I have picked up releases that baffled me as to why I can shoot this one and I can't shoot this one.
Right.
Carter came out with a BK target and I was shooting a old Carter whole thing for years. And I stood in the range and I shot groups like that at 30 yards with my whole thing. Then I shot groups like that with my BK target. And I mean, they're both a double sear handheld release, very similar,
Uh-huh.
but hold one more consistently. And that's all it boils down to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I know like when I was getting into archery growing up, it was always, well, you had to, it was kind of like that was an evolution. It was like, yeah, at the beginning you use a wrist strap
Yeah.
and then eventually you have to move to a handheld. And
That's
if you're
kind of the
really good, you
fad.
can go to a back tension.
That is kind of the fad right now. I shoot Buckmasters and we all shot indexes because when you're under the gun shooting fast like that, there's nothing more forgiving than that. Now, that being said, I used to shoot some of the speed rounds. I'd shoot like a Carter chocolate light. So the
Yeah.
chocolate light is one of them releases where the jaw moves this way so that when you crank that release around, it's still sitting right there in the gate of the jaw. That's the
Yeah.
reason a single jaw caliper is more accurate than a double jaw.
Yeah.
And they come up with all kinds of gimmicks in the release world. I remember one year True Glow built a release and I bought one and it had the jaws on the front pivoted.
Oh yeah.
Sounds good, right? In theory,
Yeah.
until you touch the side of your face with one of them jaws.
Oh,
You get flyers like you ain't never seen. But
yeah, I guess.
um, so people got to think about stuff like that. So single jaw caliper sits here and then the jaw's out here. So you're not be able to influence that. So
Yeah.
it's I think it's the most accurate. Just the problem is most cheap single jaw calipers like Scott's or stuff like that. They're good quality releases. I mean, I won IBO World one year with a Fletcher flathead, which I think is a good release. The problem with them is anytime you have a single sear style release, you get more trigger pressure for the poundage that you're pulling. So you can't get them light. And if you're going to shoot like I do, which is a command style shot, you have to have a light trigger. You can't be, your sight picture fires a shot. So it's just like shooting a rifle. If you're shooting, a 6-ounce trigger and you're building up pressure, and your sight picture initially fires the shot. So if there's a delay in that,
Uh-huh.
you're going to have some issues. So
Yeah. Yeah.
whereas if
Well,
you're a guy that just hooks onto that trigger like Michael Braden does, and you just, he makes me tired watching. But you're totally susceptible to how well you can hold the bow still. So as these guys get older and can't hold the bow as well, it doesn't hold up as well, in tournaments and stuff. So
oh yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I know like the for me, I always felt I had a really hard time going to a handheld, and then I always really like at the beginning I struggled with just shooting it under control. But then once I got that, I think that was more of a target panic thing, and once I got that under control, I've always enjoyed it. But yeah, that was always the impression was, it was just an evolution of archery. You start with a wrist strap, and but I mean, a lot of guys hunt with them, and a lot of guys do target with them. I know my cousin, my mentor, and he was a great shooter, still is a great shooter, and I mean, he would only hunt with a wrist strap, and then he shot tournaments and everything with
you realize
handhelds.
one of my best field performances as a pro. It's the first time I shot a 560 field, but I actually shot a 555 with a zero because I shot the wrong target on one. But um, I bought a $50 Scott caliper at the Lancaster trailer that morning,
Oh yeah,
and that thing was so flippin' accurate, stupid.
really?
I think I just lucked out and got the anchor point and everything just right,
Oh
and
yeah,
it was just crazy accurate. I just took a little super glue and put it on the trigger and stuck it down the sand, sanded up the trigger a little bit so I could grab it, just do dumb shit like that. But I also was not, I was anchoring like this and not behind my neck.
oh I see.
Go behind your neck and you let that strap just kind of sit
Yeah,
there. Trigger moves way forward. Now you got to
yeah, yeah.
bring your arm around in order to reach the trigger, and that's horrible too. So I'm in the process of building one. I'm going to build two of them actually. I'm going to build a hook style jaw and a single jaw caliper. Because as hunters, I like a hook better than I like, hunting sometimes is always a little bit of concession. And I'm trying to build what I consider the very best hook style jaw that you could shoot the most accurate one.
Uh-huh.
And I still feel like a single jaw caliper is more accurate in general
Yeah, yeah.
because there's a certain amount of, when you have a hook, there's a certain amount of follow that loop has with that hook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
definitely.
especially when people start putting all kinds of spring tension on the hooks and stuff, they're basically creating a little mini finger release. So if the more tension it has on that hook, the more that loop has to come around. It
Yeah,
gets deviated out of its path, and it may seem minuscule and it may seem trivial, but it matters.
yeah, yeah.
So
That I noticed when I was shooting, I shoot a Carter Insatiable, and when I was the way I held it at my anchor, the way I was rolling and pulling the shot, I noticed a lot of D-loop flicker off of that caliper because just the
yeah,
way, the
and you'll
caliper
see
didn't.
that a lot.
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't open enough. Yeah,
Well, you'll see like your D loop's a good indicator. It's one of the reasons I don't like hooks, like the true ball hooks and stuff. You can just tell by the loop wear that it's snagging.
yeah,
So
yeah,
then what happens? What happens if one day it's nice and dry out, and the next day it's raining and your loop's wet? It's not gonna come off there the same. I promise you.
yeah, yeah. Well, definitely too, and especially if I mean, if you're hunting, it's a very real
Yeah,
possibility that you're going to be in different weather.
but you got to teach people this stuff. And I probably nitpick it to the 10th degree because that's my job. That's what I do. It's my
Yeah, yeah.
nature. You know, I laid in bed all night last night, freaking thinking about how I'm going to fix my air rifles. Just it's just it never stops. And archery's pretty much you still learn things. 40 years, 41 years of doing it, I still learn things. A lot of times you're just revisiting things you learned before.
Yeah.
But it's funny, I try different things every year and I always come back full circle and end up right where I'm at.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Like
So
I
how
revisit.
long have you been doing that? Like, how long have you been into archery? And is this like
Well, I mean,
something that your family got into, or?
no, not a single person in my family shoots archery. So I kind of got into archery because I always had like this, I grew up without a TV. We were kind of poor preacher's kids, I guess. My dad
Rich in life?
didn't really like the TV and all the BS, so
Yeah,
we were a
that's
little bit
good.
sheltered in that regard. But we read a lot, as kids. So, I'd always read, westerns and stuff, and I just always had a fascination for Indian lore and things like that, and you know, loved hunting, but I just hated gun hunting because it was like everything you shot was an animal running by you. There's freaking orange people everywhere. And it just didn't like satisfy what I considered to be hunting. And so I think I got my first bow from our pastor when I was 14 years old. It was an old bear whitetail. I had three of them before I had a decent one. And then I worked with my dad all summer, and finally he bought me a golden eagle hunter. And man, if I didn't shoot a million arrows out of that bow, I'd be shocked. And I probably never replaced the cables once. I shot that bow so much that my first deer I shot, I remember it distinctly. It was a doe, mule deer. And I threw down on it and I thought 38. And then I just felt wrong. And I just picked it up a little bit, bam, just almost instinctively shot it and just dead centered it because I knew the trajectory of that bow so much
Wow.
from shooting it so much. But, it's just a slow learning curve. These kids
Yeah.
nowadays, see, you could plug a kid in. I never won a pro tournament until I was 34. Now, I went to pro tournaments. My first pro tournaments I went to, I believe, was right when I got out of the Army. So I went to Alaska in the Army,
Oh,
and I
wow.
shot a lot. I shot a lot of our state stuff, but I never shot national stuff until probably 93. The first year ASA I went, I shot as a pro the very first time I went.
Wow.
And I always finished good. I finished top 10%. I was a good shot, but without targets, you can't compete at a million yards. That's a fact. And you just can't do it. And it's one of
Right.
the reasons I'm so adamantly against unmarked yardage is that, and I'm good at it, but I have 140 targets in my backyard.
Hmm.
And I'm sick of being beholden to buying every new target that comes out, you know, and it's crap. What you do is you create, just like I explained with the air rifle thing or the rifle, the bench rest thing, you create it to where the guys that have that can be competitive. And it's one of the
Yeah.
reasons you see a big falling out in unknown yardages, and known yardages is the thing. People want to shoot their bows, okay? And more people are competitive, and you can make the game as exciting as you want. You know, OPA was phenomenal when we shot it. It was steep and deep, and to me, that's the epitome of archery accuracy. And I think that's where the sport needs to go. But the NFA, they just seemed incapable of creating anything but what I consider par archery. You know, if you miss
Yeah.
one, you're gone. It's the most stressful, not fun kind of archery there ever was created. Now, the World Archery Organization does a little bit better job by making the scoring rings a little bit smaller, arrow diameters a little smaller.
Yeah.
Um, but those guys still cleaning those rounds,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you go to Reading, for example, and before you get there, what the score is. It's going to be one to
Hmm.
two down. And I wouldn't be surprised this year if some of them guys cleans it. It's not
Really?
hard. There's nothing hard about it. And I just think it's ridiculous. Imagine Reading where you put 4 12 rings on the circles.
Yeah.
You had to call your shot every single shot of the tournament for 140 euros. Every day you'd have, you know, an absolute, you wouldn't know what's going on. You got to create your game plan. You come in and check to see where you're at, revamp your game plan,
Right.
and go
Right.
back out. You talk about a super thing to try to film. It would be awesome. But
Yeah.
you're going to get kicked back from some new shooter. Oh, I want to know what's going on, or I want to know. Go out and create your game plan. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the
Definitely.
first year we had 14s in ASA. I'm sitting here at home and I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I said, if I go there and I just like get up to a target and I think, should I shoot a 14 here? I'm going to get nervous.
Yeah.
So I told myself, and I really worked it over. I said, look, you get a throwaway score for sure of the year. So go out there and just I think I had 38 yards, everything 38 yards and under, I was shooting at a 14. And I did that. And I was 48 up at target 15. and guys would come by the group and ask what I was shooting, and they didn't believe it. But I kind of cratered right at the end because it's kind of like this. It's a high roller freaking mentality, right? You know, you've got it's just a numbers game. You're kind of factoring in the bad with the good and trying to stay out of the five ring. And but I shot 2 8s and a 5 right there at the last 5 targets. But you know what's funny about that is everybody came in after day one, seen what was going on, revamped their strategy. I had to win that tournament with a 14 on the final arrow.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
and to me, that's what archery needs. They need that dynamic.
Yeah.
It's exciting. You watch barebow at Lancaster, way more exciting to watch than anything else because there's so much happening. There's so many different lead changes, and
Yeah.
they can shoot a 6. I watched John Denver one year shoot a 0. You probably don't want to hear that, but here's a guy that's celebrated as one of the best barebow shooters out there, and he's capable of shooting a 0. So 10-point swing real fast, but
Yeah, I know from the outside looking in, and like I was saying, you start calling the 12s, you start changing it up again rather than just constantly going for the 11. Things start to get pretty exciting from a crowd, or a
sure.
spectator's point of view.
Yeah, so when I shot that first, I come out there and shoot a 9 on my first arrow, and I'm thinking, you're an idiot. And I'm thinking, Kyle's like, well, he'll give you one because he shot the guy, I shot against Morgan and he shot a 125 the match before that, which I thought, well, but I also know he's a multi-time world champion too. So
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
gonna, so he cleans the first end, then he cleans the second end. I'm on my third arrow and I'm like, shit, if he cleans this, I don't have a way of beating him. And that means I have to shoot perfect without missing also. So
yeah,
I said, screw it, now or never. And I called that 12 and hit it. And that just totally changed the dynamics of the game because
yeah,
now he only had a 1 point lead and he gave that up the next end.
yeah,
And so now we go in the fourth end and we're tied. And again, I missed one. So then I got myself down and I went for the 12, put myself back in the lead, and I forced his hand. So it's way harder to shoot a 12 when you have to have it, you
yeah. But
know?
that's what makes it exciting to watch is when you get
Sure.
situations like that, and then all of a sudden, for the people watching, you're like, yeah, well, because you don't know what's going to happen, or you don't know if he's going to make the 12, or now all of a sudden somebody's up by however many points, he has to hit a 12 in order to come back to tie it or win, and like
Yeah.
that's what as somebody from the outside looking in, that's what makes it exciting, I think.
Way more exciting to watch. Last year, the pro class, I don't remember who it was, but somebody came out there with a game plan, right? And they 12'd it right out of the gate.
Oh,
Every end
there
they were,
that's what I was telling my son. I'm like, you want to make an impression, you go up there and just right away start calling 12s, getting everyone's
well,
head.
Dave Cousins tried that one year and then missed and kind of backfired. But,
Yeah,
it's, me and Levi always said in ASA and stuff, he said, you can't win if you're afraid to lose. You
yeah,
cannot win at this level
definitely.
if you're afraid to lose. And there's a lot of guys that play too protective of a game and they don't know how to win. And I tell a lot of people, I said, I won a lot of tournaments because I have a job.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't imagine the stress of trying to pay your bills with freaking archery. I mean, there ain't enough money in that to shake a stick at. And I do pretty good at it, but still, imagine paying my bills with it. No.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's got to be tough. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on there. And there's just not the money. I mean, it's not like golf where you're getting, you know,
Well, and
$40,000 to finish in 20th spot.
I 100% blame the organizations because everybody talks about kids being the future of archery. Kids are not the future of archery. The future is creating a future for those kids, and
Yeah.
they're doing nothing. Everybody's going through the motions that are running archery tournaments. Rob has made some adjustment here, and he's got good things in mind, and I hope that we get more um, things involved with ASA because those are the best organizations. But nobody has tried to get non-endemic money into archery since Wayne Pearson did back in the '90s and the early 2000s. Because he was running a TV show and he was a promoter, right?
Yeah.
But you just, but you can't get outside money if you don't create a show. If you don't
Yeah.
create something that people want to watch, how do you expect to have money in it?
Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
can't, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And these guys, a lot of these guys, even good shooters, they come out and they want these big contracts and stuff. It's like, why? How much value is it to you to stand on that podium?
Hmm.
There's a certain value there, sure. But if you're a shooter that can stand on that podium and you spend a lot of time in social media and you spend time teaching people and garnering people's, you know, respect, and things like that, you got way more value. You know,
Yeah.
you
Hmm.
got the ability to affect their decisions when they're buying products. But the big money comes when you have the ability to affect Joe Schmo's, every average ordinary guy, not just archers and hunters, because that's a very small niche, right?
Yeah.
When you can sell advertisements for Tide soap and stuff,
Yeah.
that's when you start getting the big money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you have to have an audience for that. And that's what needs to be done. There really needs to be like I always said the guy that bought Gold Tip, Tom Zelenovich, when he um, bought us, and he's just a super guy to work under, man. He was just one of them guys that knew everybody and just knew how to make money. He knew how to fix things.
Yeah.
And he just he would a guy like him, you could take a guy like him and a guy like me, have a little archery board, but you also got to have a board of people from the media. You got to get celebrities involved so that you make it socially acceptable. There's all
Yeah.
kinds of things that have to happen in order to drive a sport,
Yeah.
and we're just more of a hobby sport at
Yeah.
this
Why do you
point.
think that is? Do you think that's just old school thinking, not willing
Well, I think
to move forward?
majority of NFA's problem is most of the directors and stuff that make those decisions are in those positions by default because nobody really wants the job. There's no real
Yeah.
demand for the job. When
Right.
you have non for profit, you get piss poor results. When
Yeah.
you have for profit and incentive, I always say incentive drives everything in the world. If you put a
Absolutely.
sales guy on salary, you're going to get shit performance out of him. You put him on a commission
Hmm.
and let him be a rock star, and you don't
100%.
have a executive with an ego that will allow that guy to be a rock star, then you have a great situation. But
Yeah.
it's so funny. I was talking to a buddy of mine who works for Ashley Furniture, and he grew his area to like where he was making $1.5 million a year, and somebody up there didn't like him making that much money, so they cut this guy who worked his whole life building building his network, cut him all the way back to like 400 grand a year. It's just like, and a lot of people are like, well, it's a lot. Well, he did the work, he earned it. Okay.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
And it's just there's so many egos involved. That's
Yeah.
that's the main problem.
Yeah. That's
So
that's that's
I was
definitely
involved.
yeah.
I shot ESPN outdoor games. I've shot Buckmasters, and none of them solve the problem because it may be a little bit better for TV, but it doesn't satisfy the archery side of it. It's not archery. It's not archery the way archery should be represented.
Yeah.
Whereas risk and reward shooting, like you've seen on Lancaster, or what we did in OPA, where we had 14 rings in play, but it was extremely difficult. Um, Lots of steep and deep shots, which
Yeah.
is, it gives you a chance to like showcase the skills involved in archery, not necessarily just to the shooter, but to the general public that's watching.
Hmm.
You go on a golf course and they bring guys off the course and talk about a hole. That's what you need to be doing. But until you see something, vision is a hard thing, man. Vision is a hard thing for leadership to see. People always
Yeah.
take the easy route,
Yeah. The safe route.
and you get out of it what you put into it.
Definitely. Yeah. That's just it. Yeah. Yeah. So when did you get mixed up with Gold Tip?
Well, I moved down from Alaska in 1997, and I moved to Utah. I kind of moved in with my parents to start with. I got a job with Union Pacific Railroad. My brother was working there, and I was working at a traveling cruise. But my end goal was to shoot archery professionally. That was what I moved here for.
Oh yeah.
Archery, Utah always had a really vibrant archery community, and so I thought, I wanted to live out west, and I ended up dating a girl here for 3.5 years, and ended up basically settling in here. But I think it was probably year or two after I got here. I was pretty much winning everything at a local level, and ran into Cody Walker up at a tournament here, and he got me set up on staff. And I used to come down to Gold Tip and you know give Marvin crap and ask him why this and why that. And I go up to see a bucket of 55 75s that were 25 different weight codes, and I'm like, is that all the better you can make them? And that's, and it wasn't, when I started working there in 2003, I believe. And maybe it was summer of 2002. Yeah, that's when it was. Summer 2002, I started there. Well, we quickly changed that because I went and worked with the guys running off the lines and stuff. And I realized, arrows coming off the line could be built within a couple grains.
Right.
So the only reason you got a high spread is because somebody high enough don't care enough,
Yeah.
and that's always the problem in every company. Somebody high enough don't care enough.
Mhm.
And we've been owned by a corporation since Tom sold it, and it's just been a fiasco because they don't know how to play this game,
Right.
and they're not willing to let the people that do.
Uh,
It's like this is a relationship game, and
yeah.
we built incredibly good relationships, had incredibly good people, and I'm the last employee. They go in and they fire people that are super key without even looking at what they do in the company.
Hmm.
What's
Yeah.
going to be the effect if I get rid of this guy? They don't. It's like they don't care. It's almost. It's sickening because I've
Yeah,
watched.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and you see it in not just archery, but in a lot of different industry. And it's you
Yeah,
get those big corporates involved and shareholders and stockholders, and then everybody's worried about their bottom line. And the things that help build a company and make it great, they weren't there to build those, so they don't know anything about it. And then that's what exactly the opposite happens, and then you end up
exactly, and
losing
they don't have
everybody.
any clue why. They think they're going to buy this product and it's going to sell to perpetuity or something. I don't know what they're thinking.
Yeah,
Honestly, you
yeah,
see it over and over and over again. You think they freaking wake the hell up. Steve Jobs said years ago when he thought that he needed this professional company to run his company when he was starting. He said the worst mistake he ever made. He said the best people to promote are the guys that don't want to be promoted.
yes, yeah,
You know, that know the job and just know they're the best person for the job. And that's kind of where we're at right now. You know, I fully expect Gold Tip to sell here in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So
wow, yeah.
I think they're finally starting to off some of these brands. I hope we land well. You know, I hope we land well. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's unfortunate. I mean, when you're part of a company and there's so many things that go into making a successful
Yeah.
business, and it takes more than just it takes a lot to build a brand and to build arrows. It takes people.
Yeah, it's just funny if you watched Carbon Express, which I had a lot of respect for Carbon Express, and they really had a great product. And could you nitpick little things that you liked or didn't like? Yeah, but as a rule, they had an incredibly good product. But as soon as they got bought by a corporate, it, first thing they did is they fired 400 staff shooters. Well, this is an industry that is a network, right?
Yeah.
And it's extremely important to have it. The strength of Gold Tip is our staff, is our network between our dealers, the guy behind the counter, the guy that influences the guy behind the counter. And
Yes.
guys might not know who Levi Morgan or Tim Gillingham or or so on, so or who these different people are.
Yeah.
But I guarantee one thing: the guy behind the counter knows.
Mhm.
And 75% of the sales in this industry are still garnered because that guy behind the counter makes the recommendation. Archery is still 90% Indian, right? And
Mhm.
crossbows have really done a lot to destroy that. Um, because they took the lazy bow hunter and just gave him an out. He
Yeah.
still gets to hunt in the cool seasons, but now he doesn't have to practice. Now he doesn't have to go to leagues. He doesn't have to go to the shop. He doesn't have to buy a new bow, a new
Mhm.
release. Doesn't have to take lessons.
Yeah.
And that truly, what I see is it needs to happen. I think is crossbows need to go to either you have a handicap for the bow season or you're in the muzzleloader season.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah. Well,
muzzleloaders, frankly, have turned into rifles. So, I don't know where that line crosses because, I mean, I got buddies building muzzleloaders I shoot 1,500 yards with.
yeah. Well, it's the same with the crossbow. I mean, guys are shooting, a long way. Like you look at some of the speeds coming out of these crossbows, and it's like, man, it's
Yeah, but
damn fast.
it creates more problems than you know. I think there's probably a lot of people shooting crossbows that think they can do a lot of things that they can't. The same rules apply. whether it's tuning bolts or tuning arrows,
Mm.
we come
Yeah.
out with a new
Yeah.
superfly bolt. And I knew this years ago. I just got in the, headbutting match with one of the guys in the company that had more power. And, but I knew this because when I was testing crossbows, I could see the variation in bolt to bolt to bolt because these bows are dumping a ton of energy into an arrow. And I fixed the problem by sleeving the bolts and stiffening them up. And so I said, and then I had them make me some high modulus bolts that are stiffer. And the problem was solved. And that product would have been out 10 years ago if somebody would, or 7, 8 years ago if somebody would listen. But that Superfly bolt we have now, I've got guys in Ravens and stuff just shooting, inch and a half, 2 inch groups at 100 yards with. That being said, I would still tell you there's no such thing as out of the box accuracy. There's a certain amount of out of box accuracy, just like buying ammo, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can buy a certain level, you can buy a higher grade of ammo, but if you want to get the top level, you got to earn it. And
that's true.
Arrows are no different. And when you start pumping stuff at 400 foot a second and put a broadhead on the front of it, I shoot Thorn broadheads, for example. And Thorn put their new titanium terror, they put a cone point on it, right? And the reason they put a cone point on it is they found even a faceted point out of a bow like a Raven created accuracy problems because you're creating a shear, a flat surface that can wind shear and plane off. And so a round point does a better job. I mean, you don't see fighter jets running around with, faceted points on the planes, right?
It's true. Yeah.
All about that even airflow around it. So the faster you move stuff, the more perfect things have to be. They have to be perfectly straight. The points have to be perfectly concentric. The arrows all have to be doing exactly the same thing dynamically. And that's the big thing I preach is tuning arrows in. And it's no different with crossbows. You have to knock tune arrows in. With a crossbow, you basically have a shooting machine, so you could sit there on a bench and just catalog them. But one of the things you can do is just to start with, that's going to save you a lot of time and effort, is just shoot them in through paper at 5 yards. Paper is a measurement tool. It tells you exactly what the arrow's doing when it's coming out of the bow. So if I got 4 arrows doing the same thing and one that's shooting a high tear, that one that's shooting a high tear is always going to shoot a low broadhead. It's going to even shoot a low field point if it's moving fast enough. It's just to a lesser degree. That's why mechanicals are more accurate than fixed blade because they just don't have as big a surface area. So if I take a fat arrow, triple X, it needs more vein than a skinny arrow and more point weight to control that planing effect.
Yeah. So that offset from one arrow to another, is that in the manufacturing of the arrow itself? Is that something in the arrow?
Nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
The closest
thing
to aluminum, but the negative of aluminum is they bend, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, you can take a crossbow, for example, that's, take an arrow that's way stiffer and still reacting inconsistent to each other because it's wrapped around a mandrel. It has a seam. It has just inconsistencies in the material and the glue and stuff all the way through the thing. And you can tune all that out usually as long as the arrow's stiff enough. If it's not stiff enough, you'll never tune it out. If I take my, when I shoot Pierce Tours, for example, on my hunting arrows at 250 spine, if I get over 120 grains, I just simply can't tune them. It's just pushing it too hard. But what's funny about that is if you take the same exact spine and you bump up to a larger diameter, like say a force, which is a velocity in a 250 spine, your tuning job gets incrementally like 300% easier. And it's just because you have a larger target for the power stroke of the string. So crossbows don't really have that issue as much because shooter can't influence that alignment of the string in the arrow like they can with a bow. And that's one of the reasons it makes bow hunting so much harder. It doesn't, people try to make those comparisons when you bring up, crossbows or you bring up, muzzleloader or long range rifles at archer. Well, people are shooting longer. Not really. 1997, I was shooting 100 yards with a bow and every bit is accurate. And it's 16 years for an elk tag last year on a pavon. I could shoot accurately to 120 yards. I never killed an elk.
Yeah.
And I ain't for the lack of trying. I lost 15 pounds. Bow hunting's different, man. You have to get the yardage. You have to draw the bow, when you're inside that zone, and you have to have a good shot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just different. I mean, the last 30 minutes of daylight, I had a freaking 330 bullet. I mean, he was under 15 yards. for 4.5 minutes. I couldn't get an arrow in it. So I didn't kill one.
How come you couldn't
And
get, you just didn't have an opportunity?
yeah, and so I reached over and about 2.5 minutes in this, he's just kind of poking his head up,
Oh
looking up
yeah,
where
yeah,
I'm kind of
yeah,
squeaking at him a little bit. And I've reached over my pack and grabbed my ultimate predator decoy,
yeah.
stuck it on my bow. When I come around with it, then he popped up to look, but he still quartered to me, and there's a bush between me and him. So I tried to
Oh,
sidle around the bush to get an angle on him, and he bolted and stopped about 50 yards, and I had like a hole like this big to shoot through,
yeah,
and I just pulled my head away to gauge the yardage a little bit, and that's all it took. He's gone.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah,
Something
yeah.
just
It's
doesn't work out, right? So, rifle hunting is 10 million times easier than bow hunting. I had
oh, yeah.
right before that, I had a 375 bull trailing his cows. He had two cows, and I'd seen him
Typical.
on the opposite hill, and I bombed down off. I was on that track in 10 minutes, less. And I'm slipping along, and all of a sudden and he's trailing the cows, mind you, by 150 yards. It just crap happens, and
Oh
I
yeah,
come
man.
over a ridge, and there's cows at 48 yards, and I'm like, where you at? Where you at? He bugles 150 yards the other side of him. He went right by him.
Yeah,
It's just,
yeah.
it's just the way bow hunting goes
Oh,
sometimes. And
definitely, especially elk hunting. Yeah,
and rifle hunting's God, I could have sat with a rifle on one side of that canyon and killed every single elk I saw on the other side of the canyon. Wouldn't even have
yeah.
been hard. And it's not bow hunting. But again, that's what makes bow hunting gratifying, I guess, is that it is so
Definitely.
difficult.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Versus reward. You mentioned you were messing around with your arrow weight. Why, or your tip weight? Why were you messing around with your tip weight?
Just when you get down that indoor game, it's a game of splitting hairs, right?
Right.
And there are times when I go up to 250 grains that I feel like my whole pattern's just slightly tighter. It just boils down to, like we talked about, the broadheads and the big diameter arrows, right?
Yeah.
So you have more surface area. Therefore, if you make a mistake, you have more tendency for it to plane off. So if you're to shoot a large diameter bare shaft and a small diameter bare shaft, way easier to shoot the small diameter than it is the large diameter. And you would need so much more point weight to override that negative effect. So I won IBO World one year with a triple X with a 50 grain point. And to give you
Holy.
an example, when I was tuning, I was shooting a Hoyt at the time. I bare shaft tuned that arrow perfectly. And 20 years ago, that's impossible, right? It's got nothing to do with it. Tuning is a function of alignment. It's aligning the power stroke of the string in the arrow. It has nothing, very little to do with arrow spine. Arrow spine is just a band-aid to it, right? Um, if I put a half a twist in a yoke with a 50 grain point, it'd move the bare shaft 20 yards that far. If I did it with a 200 grain point, wouldn't even be noticeable, wouldn't even move.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's the difference. That's the difference of when you don't have any resistance up front. If I were to touch a 50 grain point off in a 20-mile-an-hour wind, it would take off because there's no resistance
Yeah.
against that wind.
Yeah.
If I shoot a bare shaft past 20 yards with a fat shaft, at some point, it's going to do a freaking right turn or a left turn, depending on which way it got hit. It got off
Hmm.
because it's just trying to walk out there, and all of a sudden it just takes off right. Whereas you shoot a small diameter shaft, it doesn't have the surface area, so it's boring through that more. But even a few years ago, I did a test because everybody's like, well, weak arrows are more forgiving. And there's a lot of BS that just gets repeated, and people take for science, and it's not true. And I've always tried to figure out ways to test my way out of that stuff. And so I got this idea and said, I'm going to test this. So I took a variety of different shafts in as light a spine as I could possibly tune, all the way up to a stiff one. And I went from 246 diameter to 166 ID stuff. So pierced to like a pro hunter. The only thing, I'd take one arrow and I would tune that one arrow to a pinhole, and I would shoot it 8 times at 55 yards, and I'd measure the group. The only thing that made a bare shaft group better was point weight. And it only stands to reason. It's the only
Yeah.
thing you have from a correction standpoint.
Hmm.
Okay. Weak arrows were not better. So
Okay. Huh, that's interesting. So, what about like your hunting arrow? So do you, the same thing. So like when you're building arrows, for instance, are you building arrows the same way you're doing your target arrows?
Well, hunting arrows, I build 100% of my setups on a target of speed. Okay. I want to target a certain speed. I like to hunt with a minimum of 310 foot a second. And the
Yeah.
reason is I can reach distance with it, and that's just the speed. Number one problem I have to solve hunting is how far is it from here to there? That's the
Yeah,
number
yeah.
one problem. I
So
don't
do
care
you
what
like a
anybody says.
flat shooting arrow? Well, I mean, like, because you have a really long draw length, so for you to get those speeds is probably a lot easier than somebody with
Well,
like a
not really.
27 inch. Yeah.
Not really. This is what
No?
you don't understand. Free speed is never free. So because I have a long draw length, it requires me to shoot a heavy, stiffer arrow. Stiffer
Yeah,
arrows are
right,
heavy.
right. Yeah.
Can't get nothing for free. Now, if I wanted to shoot
Hmm.
fast, I'd hunt with an X cutter. And I did one year. I mean, one of the longest shots I ever made on an antelope was with an X cutter. But I was shooting that X cutter because the shafting is 250 spine, but it's 7.8 grains an inch, so it's super light.
Yeah.
So I had a 48 grain insert, a 20 grain weight screw, and a 108 grain kill zone. So I had like 170 grains in the front of an X cutter, shooting 330 something feet a second. And out to 80 yards, it was incredible. Um, that's where the diameter, there's only so much you can do to large diameter arrows. That's why 50 cal bullets are so freaking heavy, is because when you have that much diameter, you have to override the negative effects, right?
Right.
That's why your best long range bullets are real long and skinny,
Hmm.
and have a barrel taper to them, And arrows are no different, but an arrow's job is to deliver a broadhead, right? And people get all like screwed up on all kinds of stuff. I mean, I got girls on my staff that are blowing through elk with a 300 grain arrow, but they're not shooting mechanical broadheads. They're shooting when you go to 300 grain arrows, you smart enough to go to a broadhead like a Magnus Stinger that you know is easy to shoot through stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. And I always tell people the simple litmus test: if you were to take that broadhead and stab it through your hand, which one would go through easier? And I think we can come to a fairly quick consensus there. There's a lot of stubby broadheads that sharp angles. That stuff doesn't blow through. It takes more energy to do so. The thorn broadheads I shoot aren't the best penetrating, but they are the most accurate. So,
Hmm.
there's just certain things that I will do with certain broadheads. And you don't want to be shooting fixed blades 310 foot a second because there's more negatives involved. You can shoot them at 310, but if you're trying to shoot any type of long range accuracy, the problem with fixed blades, they require more vanes, which require more noise. So on my hunting setups, I'm looking to reduce noise
Yeah.
from me to the animal, number one. And that's one of the reasons I pick the broadheads I do. I can run really small vanes. I run micro diameter arrows, even though they're a pain in the butt to tune. And I shoot a glue in thorn broadhead, which eliminates the negative of micro diameter arrows, which is the insert systems. So you either
Yeah.
got the choice of putting, even our aluminum two-part system, we got aluminum and stainless steel two-part system for our Pierce. It's 54 grains. If I had 54 grains to 100 grain broadhead, I'm not going to be able to tune that arrow. There's no way. I could put our titanium is a little bit better option. It's 50 grains, and it makes it a little shorter. But then you're adding, I mean, I think dealer on them is $28 for six of them. So you're looking at retail. You're looking at 80, $90 a dozen for inserts. Or you put stainless on the front, which is super heavy, hundreds plus grains. There ain't no way in hell I'd tune that. And plus, you've lost for every 3 grains of arrow weight you put on a bow, or sometimes it's four. As you get heavier, you lose a foot per second. So it's just there's always this balancing act,
Yeah.
right?
So for your hunting arrows, do you run 3 or 4 vanes?
Four. I run four
Four.
for everything.
Okay. Yeah. What kind of vanes do you
And,
run?
I used to the first coos deer I ever shot with a bow. It's the craziest thing. That thing, I was running a micro diameter with 3 fletch banana cut, super quiet stuff, and that son of a gun still jumped the string so freaking hard. I had never seen anything like it. Didn't even know I was there. And he didn't
Yeah.
jump the string. He jumped the sound of that arrow coming at him. He come
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
completely out of his bed, and I lucked out and smoked him. But tell you where I was trying to hit him. But just like I shot a mountain reed buck last year, they were super jumpy, just like a coos deer.
Really?
I shot 70 yards, and you have a clue I was there, and he just like the arrow got like 5, 10 yards from him. He just dodged it. And I'm like, so the
Oh
next time I
man.
had a chance, I had one poking his head out behind a aloe plant. I just shot him right in the neck,
Yeah.
crushed him. You
Yeah. It's
know,
amazing
that's
how like animals and just like their sense of hearing and just how fast they move. It always baffles me. You're like,
yeah,
how
and
the
you
hell
have
did that thing dodge that
like
arrow?
a deer sit there and take it like a champ.
Yeah.
Elks. I don't know. I've seen elk jump the string super hard, or jump the arrow.
Yeah.
I had an elk one time because I used to hunt Idaho when you had to shoot fixed blades,
Yeah.
and in order to get accuracy, and I had really good accuracy out, but you're never going to get the accuracy you get out of mechanical ever. I don't care what anybody says. I'll challenge them to it any day of the week. They want to
I
put some
agree. Yeah.
money,
Yeah.
but four blazers on that thing controlled it pretty good. But I touched that arrow off on this elk, and it's a long shot. He picked his head up, spotted the arrow, and dodged it. And I'm like, I was just dumbfounded. I'm like, just another example of noise. My buddy Steve
Yeah.
Cobreen, I don't know if you know who Steve Cobreen is.
No, I don't.
A lot of people need to know him. If I get my podcast going, I'm bringing him on because this guy is a rock star. He's probably killed more SCI world records with a bow than anybody in history. He's killed probably 40 species with a bow that no other white man has. He's just that quintessential British explorer mentality.
Right. Yeah.
He just moved back to the States from Africa. He's actually from the East Coast, and he went to Africa because he just could hunt year round, right?
Mhm.
And he started a bow fishing company called Vader Bow Fishing, and he builds these like little Oneida looking bows for bow
Oh yeah.
fishing, and they're super durable. And so he's got really big into bow fishing. Well, I called him last week. He was in the freaking Amazon shooting fish. It's like I'm like, dude, you're great. Just but that's what he gets off on. And but this guy did some tests. He was my size. He's big, long draw length, and we always had a lot of good conversations because he liked shooting distance and stuff. And but he told me he did a test one time where he put a target behind the blind shooting impala, and he would film them. He said they don't even move when you shoot the target, but when you shoot at them, it's like come unglued.
Really?
And people think they jump the sound of the bow, and I don't think they do. I think the bow sometimes alerts them,
Yeah.
but they're wired. It's just like I always use this analogy. Like you and I were standing in a crowd, and there's a bumblebee come flying in. We're wired to move away from that sound.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
for sure.
I just imagine an arrow coming at an animal that's used to everything eating him.
Well, yeah, and they hear so well, and like the sound of a bow is really quick, but the sound of the arrow it's getting louder and louder and louder as it gets closer to them.
Coming at you. So
Yeah.
you're wired to move away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. 100% is that they always
I
hear
really try to
the arrow.
satisfy that. So, I try, I wish more people would build glue in mechanicals. Dale Perry has a pretty good one too over at Evolution. He builds
Oh,
a
okay.
166.
Yeah.
You can go deep six. It's kind of fallen out of favor, but
Yeah.
I think it's actually a pretty good idea. But you just want to put like our gold tip collars over the front end when you use a deep six. I did
Right.
that for my wife one time. I built her a Wasp deep six
Uh-huh.
insert and just, screwed a small broadhead in the front. So you really make that in front of that shaft a little bit tougher. Now, if you don't use a collar, you'll blow the broadhead right outside, or, if you don't have that insert glued, it'll smash into your arrow, which is, I don't think they do a good job teaching people how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got a guy, Jim Bath, in Manhattan, Kansas. This dude's killed more giant whitetails than anybody I know. And you will be shocked when I tell you what he shoots them with. And he's been doing this for 40 years.
Well, I know those whitetail guys, they I mean some of the stuff I know my brother does and he puts a lot of whitetails down and it baffles me
This
that he
guy,
does what he's got.
this guy grew up shooting tournament archery, right? NFA
Yeah.
tournament archery. And he's killed several 220, 230 giants. I mean, I got a whole list of them. But you know what his arrow is? 280 grains.
Wow.
Shoots a 55 grain rocket glued in the front of a VAP TKO. Before that, he shot a 3LO4 ACC. For years, he was shooting 330, 340 foot a second to solve the problem. Building equipment is about solving problems. And
Yeah,
if
yeah.
your problem is big deer jumping the string, speed's going to help that. Wyatt
Definitely.
broadheads, it's a little
Yeah.
bitty broadhead, but he blows right through them. 50
Yeah.
pounds. He's shooting over 300 foot. He's blowing right through them because kinetic energy is kinetic energy. It's the amount of energy that the arrow gathered from the bow. If I take, and I've done this test several times, we did a video, I think it's called Why Gold Tip, if you look it up. where we did some testing and stuff. And I don't know if that's it or it might have been a penetration video we did, but I took a brand new block target and I took a full metal jacket, which theoretically is a great penetrating head, right?
Yeah.
Skinnier diameter. And I took 55 7 or a 75 95, I think it was. And one setup was doing 310 and one was doing 280 out of the same bow. Not one time did that full metal jacket out penetrate that bastard arrow.
Really?
Not one. A
Yeah.
couple times it was equal because I shot it 5 times,
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody's it's not a test medium. Well, what is a test medium? Penetration is penetration, right?
Definitely.
It's people think they can shoot through shoulders reliably or are full of themselves and they need to learn to shoot their bow better. And there's just so much ego involved with that whole argument.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you should be building anything to shoot through shoulder. I think you
No, you
should
should
be
be built,
shooting. Yeah, should be shooting where you need to shoot. Work on accuracy. Work on shooting.
be building setups where you don't miss and hit the shoulder. You
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
yeah, stuff's gonna happen. I watched my
Oh,
buddy shoot completely
inevitably.
the shoulders of an elk and got a complete pass through. He got lucky. He hit that just right in that corner there where it went right through between the bones. Any more left or right, he would have lost it. There's no way in hell that arrow would have went through. And you know you can get lucky and go through the blade sometimes, but dude, I got massive energy in some of my setups, and it's like I shot through two caribou like they weren't even there with that thorn setup. And then I shot a kudu last year, and but people understand too, animals that are moving, like if it lunges at the shot, it's just like swinging a bag target. It's going to take some of that energy. Okay.
Definitely. 100%.
Um,
Yeah.
but that one went through, hit the opposite thing, and kind of bounced back and it hit him in the liver, but he made it a couple hundred yards. It was typical of a liver shot. But um, bigger animals, I don't know. I always liked that kill zone style head. You know, I really, really like that head. They've kind of screwed it up since they got bought by a corporate company. I
Hmm.
think they try to cheapen everything up. And, I've never had a problem with a rage really. I just like those blades pinned together because then you have a ferrule with the broadhead clear down here. So you have this coning of tissue in front of the actual blades. And that
Right.
creates a big entry hole, which I think is the most important thing on big animals is that you get a good entry hole.
Hmm.
Elk, you shoot a lot of elk right at dark, right at dusk. The herd blows. It's hard to pick a trail. Sometimes you shoot them with a little fixed blade, you may not find blood for 150 yards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very hard to sort out.
Yeah. Cut
Whereas,
penetration is definitely good. Yeah. It's important.
my buddy Jake Jacobson here owned Jake's Archery, for years, and he's like 80. He's like 83, 84 years old. But about 4 or 5 years ago, I talked him into shooting kill zones. And I would have never told him to shoot the 2.3 that he went and shot because he's only shooting 64 pounds with a 340 grain arrow. He shoots a 397 bull, biggest bull he's ever shot. And he shoots it with this kill zone. He said, Timmy, I keep that picture on my phone because it has like a 4.5 inch entry hole.
Yeah.
He said, that's the biggest blood trail I've ever seen in my life. He said, it
Yeah.
was insane. And he has shot that broadhead ever since. Went to Africa and shot sable, all kinds of stuff with it. And I always laugh when the African guys like, well, our game's tougher. No, they're not really. There are animals. Kudu's a big animal like an elk.
Yeah.
But I hit an elk one time though with 2 years ago, or 4 years ago. I shot a big 360 bull up in Montana with that thorn, and I thought I smoked. I mean, I did 60 yards, but I think I must have centered a rib, and I didn't get the greatest penetration. And that's kind of where I kind of lean away from, you know, large diameter mechanicals on big bone animals like that. Because,
Yeah.
yeah, it'd be better if I went to my 500 grain chaos, but in order to get speed out of that, I got to pull 80 pounds, which I really don't want to do anymore. Yes, I could drop down to a fixed blade, probably get a little bit better penetration, but there are mechanicals out there that have good penetration
Oh, definitely.
characteristics. Like Grim Reaper, their blades come back and they come back at a good angle, so they go through. I don't necessarily like the fold back designs because you don't get as good at entry holes.
Yeah, that's the only thing. Like I've shot Grim Reapers, and I mean I've killed moose, elk, buffalo, you name it, with those specific broadheads. And the
One thing,
the entry hole is definitely could be a little bit better. The four blade is supposed to be a lot better than the three blade for entry hole. Um, but I
but I
mean, the
always
exit
like,
hole on those is yeah, it's killer.
but for every bigger blade, bigger hole you got, you give up something too. The more blade surface you put out there, the more problems you're going to have. So, you know, I don't know. My drawing's hard on stuff, and I bought broadheads that a lot of them that come open in flight, and
Hmm.
and people. I bought this broadhead last year, and it looks good. It actually looks a lot like the Beast broadhead, very similar.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah,
whoever freaking engineers this crap, it's just baffling. It's a wonder, like, do they even test this stuff?
yeah,
Because I got my daughter's boyfriend out there, and he's not a big guy. He's shooting 65 pounds with a 28.5 inch draw length, and these things are coming open in flight.
yeah. That's no good.
So I just went and bought a stiffer spring for him, and it fixed the problem. But there's some other issues in it. But
Yeah, you
that
shouldn't
beast.
have to do that. Yeah, like
Yeah,
you're
well, I
buying.
understand that. I mean, these guys are engineers, right? I'm just a
Yeah.
schmuck that knows how to fix things. That doesn't like
Well,
math.
but it goes back to, yeah, I mean, you're the user, right? And nobody's shot more arrows than you. So I mean, that's what we were
I'm a
talking about
practice.
before. You can have these companies that, everything might look good on paper, and sure you could build stuff, but you have to trust the guys that are using it, because that's where it's going to matter. If all of a sudden you get a
Yeah,
bad rap for a shitty broadhead, you're not going to carry much longevity.
yeah, just a practical application expert.
Yeah.
So, and I kind of
Well,
got an engineering mentality, but I don't know that I don't like math enough to be an engineer. So, but I kind of wish I'd learned to do CAD and stuff like that, because there's a lot of things I like to create,
yeah,
but sometimes you just got to leave that part up to the experts. The best products are designed by an engineer that gets in team with the actual practical application experts and the
yeah.
guys like we built the Bushnell Broadhead rangefinder, for example, and they wanted me to help them with it, and I said okay. So it says like plus or minus half yard good. I'm like no. I said tell me this because I don't know the answer. Why can I buy a Leica disto tape measure for $350, same price as your rangefinders? Get it, it'll range within a half an inch. I mean, or whatever, tighter than that. Why can't we get that in a rangefinder? And so I just kind of pose those kinds of questions to them, and I think they come out with a pretty good product. I can't wait to see the Gen 2. Like any product, there's always little things that they don't foresee. It's just the weirdest thing because it's such an accurate broadhead, or
Mhm.
an accurate rangefinder. I took it out. I always take them out on three different color targets, lay a steel tape out, and that thing was absolutely dead on.
Oh yeah. Well,
And,
that's important too, because there's like some rangefinders, I mean, they'll work good on black, but then you try them on like white, or if they'll work,
well,
you
black's
know,
typically the worst problem, and the cheaper rangefinders sometimes will read a yard or two off. I had a Leica
yeah,
one time read
yeah. Or
damn
even
near
in sunny situations like 3D, sometimes that throws it off. So,
Yeah, and it's all the quality of the laser, and it just really boils down to when the guy's building it, he needs to know what you expect out of it, and it's really that easy. But there were some weird things that came up because they targeted that rangefinder just for bow hunting, and it had a little sensitivity to dust in the air and fog. The
oh really?
first tournament we go to, it's all hyped up, and we get a little fog and it won't read. And one of the guys was like, just breathe on the laser receiver. So we just like fogged it up and then hit it, and it works perfect. And it's like, what? And so I tell them that, and they're like, what? Like just stuff you never heard of. And so they're working on that to those fixes, and that's where you get the best products. Usually, a second generation.
Yeah,
Hardly ever get the perfect product first time out. And
yeah, yeah. Makes sense
it
though.
doesn't matter whether it's an air rifle or a. You never buy a first gen air rifle ever.
Yeah.
There's always something, and so just little things like the spring in the battery thing was stretching on some of them, and they quit working because of something stupid, and you just got to fix those little things. It's a
Yeah,
little
get the kinks
tinny
out.
feeling.
Yeah.
It's really lightweight, which is nice, but it's when you put it up against your bow to range an animal or something, it's a little loud. It needs to be rubber armored, and there's some.
Yeah.
And some of it's just perception is reality, right? So if something feels expensive, it gives you a better feeling about it. And there's just little stupid things like that, like the focus on the rangefinder was a little bit on the loose side. You want something like that you can set to your eye and then lock it down.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
You don't want it changing all the time. You go to range an animal, all of a sudden it's out of focus, you'll be pissed
Yeah.
off.
Yeah. Definitely.
So
Yeah.
there's just, little things that you gotta, and that stuff always gets built better when they're, you don't have, an engineer with an ego that thinks he knows everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
No,
not all the
I
time.
yeah, I know all the guys I talk to. The guys that are doing it themselves or that are working with somebody who's had field experience, they definitely put out the best products.
Well, you want to look at the sport, in archery especially, we kind of get the short end of the stick a lot of times on products because the entire industry is dumbed down to the 30-yard whitetail bow hunter. That's the majority of the sales. So that's where everybody's targeting.
Hmm.
And so if you go to PRS, for example, and rifle shooting, all that rifle shooting is driven by the competition people. Okay. So they want better rangefinders. They want applied ballistics in there. They want quick, solutions for stuff. The average hunter would never even freaking know about that stuff, if it wasn't like proven in competition. And I told my buddy that when he started Utah Air Guns here, and he's got a big tournament here every year now. I said, you get a tournament and you get some guys sponsored up, and your guys are winning stuff. You will gain mass credibility, and that tournament will drive the innovation in the sport. It's exactly what's happened.
Yeah.
90% of people still buy them just to go shoot small game,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. But what drives the innovation and drives the quality of the product has more to do with what the competition guys want.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I agree with you. Well, buddy, thanks for hopping on the show. Took us a little while to get started, but we got it figured out.
Yeah, it's always good just to, freelance.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I really enjoyed watching you at Lancaster. You put on a good performance. So did a lot of other guys. I mean, there was a lot of good stuff. 3 660s, that was fun to watch, and just a bunch of good
That's
shooting all around.
It's just insane. One of my guys last year shot the first 660, or one of the first 660, the second 660. I think Rio shot the first one, I think, and he shot it with a crazy setup. 120 grain point to triple X. No indoor shooter shoot that setup, but he just felt like that faster arrow getting away from the bow. So when I make recommendations, I never give guy a blanket recommendation. It's like start here, use our fact weight system to
Hmm.
do the experiments because your shot style you might see a slight difference you might find the advantage for you from a forgiveness standpoint and speed versus the point weight. So,
Yeah.
we make a system that makes it very easy you know, to do that. It's just like the grips I sell, for example. I sell Matthews grips they have 5 inserts for angles. Most people never get to try different grip angles because nobody makes them.
Hmm.
So it's just a neat little product because you can try it. And I always tell people, they want me to tell them what grip to get. I said, well, get the whole set and play with it because you'll
Yeah.
never know until
Till you
you
try it.
try it.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
One bow might like this, one bow might like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Well, no, it's been great. I've been really enjoyed talking to you, learning, like listening, talking to you and Greg. Every time I get a chance to talk to you guys, I always learn something new. So I appreciate your time. I'll put links to all your stuff up in the show notes. Your Instagram where you do a lot of videos and stuff on there. So
I
anybody,
hoped, yeah, I hoped at some point get time to do a lot more, and I want to do it really organized. I got the idea to build a website and YouTube channel called I Can Archery to kind of empower people to learn how to do their stuff. I don't have it
yeah,
launched yet. It's just I don't have a lot of time. It's just this year I cut 5 tournaments out of the schedule, so hopefully I get a little bit of time to get a website going and start populating a YouTube channel and then putting that over on the website in a very organized fashion so it becomes a library of information.
yeah, no, that'd be good. Yeah, we look forward to
YouTube
that for sure.
YouTube sometimes a little bit unorganized and trying to find stuff.
Well, there is so much stuff that you have to just kind of scroll through, and a lot of it is that you find on there. You're like, well, maybe this shouldn't be on YouTube. Maybe this should be out there for other people to absorb
Yeah,
because
it's
some of
funny.
the
People,
messages that are coming across are,
people don't. As a rule, I don't think people are very good at testing things. And just it. I won't bring up any names. I got I brought up a guy's test one time and he calls me up and I'm like, well, I was just trying to do this. And I'm like, I just like trying to like be politically correct and tell him like, look, when you test stuff, you gotta have a baseline, and you just can't throw shit up. You just can't throw shit up against the wall, and that's what happens a lot. Like I'm going on here trying to find like reviews, quality reviews on an air rifle I might be interested in. I can't find one.
Yeah.
There's one guy if he did the review I would trust, but most of the time, most of these reviews are terrible. It's like they don't satisfy. It's like they're going through the motions rather than giving you like really the things you want to know before
Yeah.
you buy
Yeah.
a $2,000 gun.
Yeah. There's a lot out there, and there's a lot of stuff out there that I know there's a lot of archery stuff out there, and some of it I watch and I'm like, well, I mean, hopefully that the end user does their best, like uses their judgment when they're watching these.
It says, there's a saying, it takes 10,000 hours to be an expert. And that's true.
Mhm.
It's true on everything, and you have to pay your dues. Some people get lucky and a lot of these young kids, they get good information. They got good equipment to start out with, much better than we did. And so they get to that. And I always say it's going to be a really rough life for guys from 34 to 50 anymore because these young kids are coming at 16 to 30 and they're in the prime of their physical prime and they have all the information. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing these just incredible scores, incredible, that's because they're at the point where they hold the bow the steadiest, and they've got
Mhm.
all the information. You're just putting so many kids through the mix, you're going to have a certain percent of them going to climb to the top, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you got
Well,
to pay
that's
your
good. I
dues.
mean, it's good for any sport, though. It's good. I mean, as competition gets better, everybody raises their level. So,
And I enjoy it. I mean, like I said, my first time I went to ASA, I shot pro. I wanted to shoot against Randy Ulmer.
mhm.
I wanted to shoot against the top guys at the times. I want to see where I was
Yeah,
at.
yeah, yeah. Test yourself.
You can't teach that to people. They either got it or they don't. They
Yeah,
either have that desire to be at the very top or they don't.
yeah,
And a lot of people think they should earn their way through the top. And I say you just get in the mix.
yeah. Mix it up for sure. Awesome. Okay, buddy. Well, I appreciate your time, and yeah, look forward to
I
hopefully
appreciate
chatting with you again down the road.
appreciate you having me on. So,
Okay, take care.
all right, have a good one.